Words are powerful. They're incredibly powerful. And I personally believe that they have the ability to cause more long-term trauma, more long-term lasting trauma than debilitating physical blows. I grew up in a small farming community in Tennessee. My parents were sharecroppers, and we had a small family of 10. And I say a small family of 10 because my mom was one of 14 and my dad was one of 13 children. I had 3 older siblings. My oldest brother was born in 1955, my second brother was born in 1957, and my oldest sister was born in 1958, and I came along in 1960. In 1954, there was a landmark Supreme Court case that I'm sure you all have heard of, Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka. Basically, the gist of that case was state laws that established separate public schools for black children and white children were unconstitutional. So that was 1954. My oldest brother was born in 1955. I came along in 1960. My first memory was about 1965. So I'm sitting on a tricycle, right? And I'm sitting on this tricycle that had belonged to my older siblings. And I'm sitting on the sunny side of our sharecropper shack. And this is 800 square foot sharecropper shack that we called home. And it's a chilly mid to late spring day, but there's this lovely ribbon of sun covering me, and I feel great. I feel happy. I feel content. And if you were to look at pictures of me during this time, you see this deeply sad child. But on this day, I felt this bittersweet wonderfulness. It was just absolutely amazing. The sun was lovely. So I sat about 100 feet from the road that ran in front of the shack. And there was this big tree. And we knew, our parents told us, if you stay behind the tree, everything will be okay. You'll be fine from all of the things that go down the road. So 1965, right, 11 years after Brown versus Board of Education, and my small farming community was still segregated. Why was I sitting outside on that tricycle? Well, I was waiting for my older siblings to come home from school. They went to school in this dilapidated one-room school. And I can close my eyes now and conjure up an image of that building as if it were 1965. But change was afoot. The fall of 1965, I would be the first child in the family to go to an integrated school. So things were looking up. Now, once or twice a month, my mom would pile all the kids into our old, early 1950 pickup truck and go into town, which is about an hour away, to pick up basic supplies. And when we'd go, we would always pass this playground. And I'd always say, hey, can we stop at the playground? And to me, this is an amazing playground. This was like 1965, like all of the playground things that you guys could never touch, you know, like those metal slides that went into the sky, the jungle gyms, everything was metal. We had these teeter-totter seesaws, so that was in the playground. And it was just amazing. There was everything there. My favorite, though, was that old sturdy, it was like this sturdy swing set, and they had these solid black seats, and I just like looked at that swing, and I so desperately wanted to go into that swing. And there was actually this chain link fence around that to protect that playground. Now, I don't remember if my mother ever even responded when I asked if we could stop and play, but what I do remember clearly is that we never stopped to play at that playground. What I didn't compute in all of those trips past that playground, that was the playground that was attached to the school where the white children went. And the school that they went to is this really sturdy red brick building. And so several months later, again, it's the fall of 1965, my mom and I walk across the graveled parking lot that leads to that school. So we're walking across that parking lot together. And my mom parked at the she parked that old truck at the farthest end of the parking lot. And when we got out, she took my hand. And I was really surprised that she took my hand because my mom is not an affectionate person at all. So we walked there, and I can remember very clearly what I had on. I had on the cutest little yellow dress, and it had a white sailor collar. I had on my little Mary Janes, and my hair was in these 3 evenly divided neat plaits. So I was ready. So we walked into the classroom, and I don't remember my mother leaving me that day. I don't remember her saying goodbye to me. Even now, all of these years later, as a 58-year-old woman, I often think about my first day at school, mostly in the context about how do children process the unknowns. But really and truly, it's how we all process unknowns, right? It's quite similar. There were positives, there were negatives, and there were neutral experiences. A positive experience. I remember this orange juice. It was thick with pulp. It was amazing. And in the little graham cracker squares that fit perfectly in a child's hand. Before that, before that day, I don't know that I'd ever had orange juice. I don't know that I'd ever had a graham cracker square. A neutral experience, the tour of the classroom. When we went to the bathroom, I had no idea what those things was. I didn't know what a toilet was. I didn't know what a sink was because we didn't have those things in our little sharecropper shack. So I was like, I can remember the sadness because it was clear that all of the other kids, they knew what those things were. But there was also some hope that day because they announced recess. And remember, I had a relationship with that swing. So I run out to the swing, and it's amazing. I get to it first. I back up and I sit down in that strong-like plastic swing, and you know how you push your arms back and your knees back, and I was ready to push off. I was ready to launch. But before I could execute, there was this little boy standing in front of me, a classmate, and he said to me, he said, "Nigger, get out of my swing." And it froze. I didn't know what to do. Sure, of course, I had heard that word before, but I'd heard it mostly behind that tree when we were standing in the yard where we were protected. I had never seen or felt that word until that day. So I dutifully removed myself from his swing, and I walked over to that chain link fence that was there to protect us. And I laced my tiny fingers in the openings, and I cried silently. I just stood there and cried. I don't remember anything else that happened at school that day. I do remember that I never told my parents. I never told my parents. My 5-year-old brain computed that I was the nigger. And I was ashamed to be